Hello, Rimfire friends. Today is Friday, August 12th, 2022. Happy Friday. I'm down here today with this old girl here. This is my 1969 Anschutz 1416 Model 64 action with the double set trigger. It's actually wearing a really nice set of rear match sights at the moment. Well, front too, but you can see the rear. I thought I would film this quick video as kind of an explanation for something I had recently kind of discovered by accident, or rediscovered by accident, I should say. One of my good shooting buddy and pals, Dave, who recently got hold of a really nice new Anschutz 64, was asking me about 10-shot magazines. And I had mentioned to him that it's super simple to modify Savage MKII or Savage 4 Series mags or Lakefield to fit an Anschutz at a fraction of the cost. And after a quick Google search, I realized that there's tons of information online about this, and people talk about it in forums, and no videos kind of explaining what exactly that means. So I thought I'd film this real quick and show you guys what's actually involved with that for those who are interested. Now, why is this sort of thing important? Well, for those of you who live in Canada like me, Anschutz magazines are quite expensive, and they're usually only available from Anschutz dealers. So it's not something you could walk into your local Cabela's and pick up. It has to be a dealer of Anschutz, and half the time you can't find them. So when you can find them, they're usually at a dealer, in my case, clearly on the other side of the country, on the other coast. And so a 5-shot will cost you 90 bucks Canadian, a 10-shot will cost you, I think 100, maybe 105, I forget now. By the time you pay shipping and tax, you're looking at 130, 135 bucks, 40 even, to your house for one 10-shot magazine, and pretty close for the 5-shot. So most people who have Anschutzes, really, for the most part, don't have too many magazines for that reason. Also, an Anschutz magazine, for those of you who don't know, I'm holding one here, is probably, I would label it as adequate. It's one of the type of magazines that never seem to really suit the rifle. They're kind of a pressed and folded over construction. They have a plastic base plate, which is totally fine and smooth when you're shooting offhand. But for those of you who have used these guns in silhouette, if you've ever seen somebody or experienced yourself dropping these on concrete, it hurts and you cry. So they do have their disadvantages. They have a lot of similarities with Savage MKII magazines. The construction is almost identical, the thickness of the material, although I find the modern Mark II magazines are a little bit thinner than the older Savage 4 series, but they still fit. But I find that steel maybe isn't as high quality. But you can see the construction is identical almost. The thickness, the profile, almost the same. The Savage is a little bit longer, whereas the Anschutz has this plastic plate on it. Now, one thing I'll say is when you look at the front part of the magazine, you'll see that these ribs are on either side of the Anschutz one, and they're identical on the Savage. So this is the edges of the magazine. You can see, if you can see that profile there, so they're almost identical. On the back side, the Savage has raised rib portions, and the Anschutz does not. And so you can see here, there's a magazine catch right there. That's where the lever of the magazine retention catches. And the Savage doesn't have that because the Savage uses a latch that catches on the bottom of the magazine. Okay, so there's no little groove or notch filed in here because it retains that way. So you slap it in, there's a little notch for those of you who have these guys. But otherwise, they're almost identical. Now, the Savage magazine as is doesn't fit. It kind of wants to fit, but it just stops. Whereas the Anschutz magazine, of course, fits in no problem. You can see that the follower is level in the bottom of the receiver, beside the two guide bars there, and everything is fine in the world. Nice flat profile on the bottom for shooting offhand, super awesome. And Anschutz have a very, very stiff retention level. Some are worse than others, but some are affectionately known as fingertip shredders because they're quite stout. And mine is old and the serrations are very well worn, but some of the new ones, you'll slip off and actually literally bend your thumbnail back sometimes. So they're quite stout. Now, as a result, they feed great, magazine fits in really tight, everything you'd want. And I'd rather have a stiff magazine lever and something a magazine tough to take out than something that won't feed any day. So this rifle feeds great, as most Anschutzes do, in my experience. So anyway, so what's involved here? Well, literally within minutes, you would take this magazine, in which case I've modified the 10 rounder because, well, why not? You take it to your belt grinder, in my case, and you remove those ribs. Try to get in frame as best I can. So this one, you can see the ribs, and this one has none. Okay, so I remove those on my belt sander. You can kind of see where the profile has changed, and I make the ribs even the whole way. Takes about 3 or 4 trials getting in the rifle before it fits in properly, and literally this takes under 5 minutes to completely modify from start to finish. So after you get those larger ribs removed, so the profile is even all the way, like an Anschutz, you line them up together, mark it with a Sharpie, take a nice sharp round file, and you file the magazine notch. Now I'll tell you, the one tip I'll give you is the temptation is to slap your file on and you just file a groove directly across the magazine like this to fit. But if you're not exactly straight and you're cattywampus, you're going to file that notch higher and lower on one side. And from experience, I've learned when I was a younger fellow, that will have disastrous consequences on occasion where the magazine won't retain properly. So what I typically do is I file one side slightly larger than the other, meaning I file them separately, and that's just to fit perfectly, because even though it does fit, it's not an Anschutz magazine, it's a Savage that you're fitting in an Anschutz. So a little bit of fitment takes place, and so I file 2 different sizes basically, so that I have the ability to adjust them. Now, you could certainly start small and then work, and I've done that too, but in my experience I found it to just kind of get the magazine seated and then adjust it after that. So that's my tip. So I make them slightly different. Now, this is just freshly done 20 minutes ago. So I'll go back and I'll fix this magazine notch, as well as I quickly removed the burrs for this video to show you guys. I just quickly took a file and cleaned up the belt kind of grinder areas. But I'm going to go spend some time and clean this all up with some proper paper and make it super smooth. So this isn't a finished product, but you can spend a lot of time making it absolutely great. But anyway, it fits in the rifle as it should. Exactly like an Anschutz. You can see it's totally flat like the Anschutz was. Everything works totally fine. I've tested it with ammunition. It feeds and extracts totally reliably, exactly like an Anschutz. It's totally retained in there properly, and it totally removes like an Anschutz. Now, this is attractive because these magazines are about $30. I think that's what I paid for this one locally, about $30. So if you were so inclined, you could buy basically 3 or 4 10 rounds for the price of one 10-round Anschutz, and then you'd have 4 times this magazine, and readily available. So for me, that's the biggest advantage, is that you don't have to wait, you don't have to pay for shipping for an Anschutz magazine, and they're, like I said, the construction is identical, or virtually identical, and they fit and function, in my experience, just as good as an Anschutz, if not better, due to that plastic follower in some cases. And you can't really tell from outward appearances. Now, I haven't done this 5-shot. I was only kind of showing you guys what was involved. They do stick out a little bit farther, but because of that release lever, it actually gives you something a little bit better to purchase on, to pull with your fingers. It just gives you something slightly more proud to grab, because the Anschutz you cannot, it's flush. So it gives you something to pull. You don't always need that for every Anschutz, but this old Anschutz, even with its original magazine, when I first got it, I spent a lot of time removing a little bit of material and polishing that, because this magazine was so tight. Like, I'm telling you, I could barely remove it. A lot of times I had to push it from inside. And there's a little bit of adjustments that you can do inside, but like I said, if the rifle feeds fine, I don't want to mess with the actual internal guide bars. I don't want to mess with the actual rifle. A replaceable magazine, even an expensive one, is worth modifying more than the actual guide bars of the rifle. That's just my notion. But anyway, that's what's involved with modifying one of these. It's not a complicated process at all. Start to finish, 20 minutes, a little bit longer to blend it and get it going. But super easy otherwise. And then you got some inexpensive magazines readily available. Keep your Anschutz running smooth. But anyway, I want to thank you guys, as always, for watching. Any questions or comments, leave below. And if you want any detailed measurements on these mags, where the notches are, measurements, I'll do my best. But, you know, every rifle's different. Every magazine's a little bit different. So if you have an original magazine, you should be able to just, line it up and go with that. And even if you're missing a magazine, it's super simple to replace it. It would take a little bit longer. I would take it out of the stock and find the guide bar notch location that way. Rather than trying to just guess. And like, I could measure this and put the measurements up online, but I really would do it individually to each rifle. So anyway, Thanks a lot for watching again. I'll catch you guys in the next one.